It was after season 8, and I thought they were trying to get me to go to King of the Hill.
Mhm.
And I had whatever, I had the chance to stay at Simpsons, and I thought, well, there's no way it goes past season 10.
Yeah. Or any show goes past season 10.
It just
Yeah.
doesn't happen. And so, yeah, I left. I thought I kind of felt badly leaving, but I thought what's much better to go on a show with some life in it.
You're listening to What the Hell is Michael Jamin Talking About? Conversations in writing, art, and creativity. Today's episode is brought to you by my debut collection of true stories, A Paper Orchestra, available in print, ebook, and audiobook. To purchase and to support me and this podcast, please visit michaeljamin.com/book. And now, on with the show.
All right, everyone, welcome back to What the Hell is Michael Jamin Talking About? My next guest is an old colleague of mine, old friend from my days on King of the Hill. But before I let him talk, his name's John Collier. Welcome to the show. But let me tell you what he's done. This guy's credits are pretty incredible. So you sit back and relax. Let me tell you what he's done. So he wrote on The Simpsons. Okay, we've heard of that show. I'm only giving some of the highlights. Some of the highlights. Some Scooby Doo's, which I did not know. King of the Hill, Monk, The Good Family, Bones, The Good Cop, Law and Order. This guy has done he's done a lot. But thank you so much, man, for doing the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Let me tell you about who you are, because I remember very clearly walking on my way to my office on King of the Hill. Yours was I would always walk past you, and I would often stop and say hello, or sometimes I would just sit and you always had a big smile. You're always so happy to greet me and have me there. And I never felt like I was getting in the way. You goes, hey, come on in, come on in. You're always very kind.
I am endlessly in search of distractions.
I do remember walking past you on days like when you're on script and just looking miserable.
I am. Thank you. Nope, that's exactly it. Well observed. I am never more miserable than I am alone in writing.
But why is that, do you feel?
Oh, it's a horrible thing to do. TV writing is one of the most fun, engaging, productive things you can do if you're with other people, I have found. And I love that part of it. And the small portion of the job that relies on you being alone, entails, I should say, you being alone and actually writing something without people around is misery for me.
But is it the comedy part? Because you also do drama now. Which one is harder?
Comedy's harder.
But why? Okay, but yeah, I would agree with that as well. But is it miserable to write drama as well?
I find the process of keeping stuff alive and interesting and propulsive is really, really hard.
And how do you know? How do you know when it's alive?
Well, sorry?
How do you know?
How do I know when it's right?
Yeah, how do you know?
That's part of what makes it so miserable.
Right.
Is you can always second guess yourself. And even more so when there's jokes involved.
Yeah, well, for jokes, for sure. So, and what was that transition like for you? I'm amazed that anyone can do it.
Oh, it was, I got very lucky. What happened was that King of the Hill we got canceled. Remember, It was the time the show got canceled. It was canceled 2 times.
We left after the first time.
Yeah, and I left. So it got canceled, and I really realized it was for real when they started moving our furniture out of the office.
Because you were going to squat there.
I had every intention of squatting.
You thought it was all big bluff until they moved the furniture.
And so that was happening, and I was just kind of, I'd done comedy for about 17 years at that point.
Yeah.
And I didn't love doing for camera comedy. I liked doing animation, and there were no real single camera comedies on the air at the time.
Yeah.
And I didn't quite know what to do. But I knew I'd stopped watching comedies. I kind of could feel the sweating on them and the work on them because I worked in so many comedy rooms.
Yeah.
And I got really lucky, which is that Andy Breckman, who was running Monk at the time, who created the show, he used to have 3 guest writers come in every season. And he did that because he felt like he kept him on track. If you came in as a guest to the room in New York, it made him concentrate and work harder and make sure that in 5 days you would break a story.
Why? Because people flew in, you mean?
Yeah, because the studio would fly you into New York and put you up, and they would only keep you there for 5 days.
Okay.
And so
that's interesting.
I got one of those guest shots. And the other thing I got lucky was that.
But wait, but how did you get that guest shot?
I got that guest shot because this is embarrassing. My agent at the time, who I didn't think was doing enough for me, got me a meeting with Andy Breckman.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought just one meeting with Andy Breckman, who's a great guy and I love the show, but who knows if it's going to turn into anything. I fired my agent, moved on to another agent, and then Andy called me up and said, "Oh, we want you to do this episode a month."
Right.
But there was no
but I've already fired my agent.
But that was done, and it was a change. And what happened was that so anyway, Andy used to only hire comedy writers to do guest episodes.
Why?
Because his theory was that he could teach a comedy writer how to write a procedural. He could not teach a procedural writer how to be funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anyway, they flew me to New York. I was in the room. We broke a story. And I wrote it, and it went well. The whole thing went well, and I got very lucky again because no one had ever really left the show or been added to it. This was the 4th season, and one writer was leaving, and Andy offered me the job.
Right.
So I came in and went on staff the next season.
How many seasons did you do there?
I did 2 more seasons, and then the writer's strike of 2007 happened.
Right.
And when that happened, I didn't know how long that would go on. Mike and the Good Family was starting up, and they got what was called a strike waiver.
Okay.
And there were certain production companies, and one was MRC, Media Rights Capital.
Right.
And they made a deal with the WGA, with the Writers Guild, that they could do shows that were during the strike, and it would not be strike breaking to work on those shows if they agreed to abide by the WGA's terms, the writers' terms.
Yeah.
So the WGA was using that as a tactic to try to force the studios to.
And it's funny they didn't really do that this last strike.
No, I don't think it really helped.
And you don't think it helped?
I don't know if it did, or actually, no, I can't say if it did or not. I thought all I can say is I think this last strike was better run than the first one. I think a lot was learned from the first one.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, I left Monk because I got a job right away rather than being in strike.
Right. Let me ask you that when you're on Monk and you're with procedural writers who are not comedy writers, when they would pitch something that you and I would call a clam, or like not like if you would pitch it in the room at The Simpsons, The King of the Hill, someone would say, right? Was there a lot of that going on? Were you the guy who said, yeah, that's not really a joke?
Well, no, at Monk though, you had, first of all, it was comedy writers. It was a small staff.
Okay.
And it was 4 people whose background was comedy, including Andy Breckman, and then one, Hy Conrad, who was just a terrific mystery writer, and he had written something like 200 mystery books.
Oh, wow.
And the way he got on staff was that Andy met with him and took him out for lunch and said, "Look, I love your mystery books, and you have 2 choices. One is you come on staff, or 2 is I'm just going to steal all your plots anyway."
Oh, wow.
So Hy was on came on staff, and he was on Monk for the whole run. And then he was on The Good Cop with me too. That was another Andy Breckman show.
Right. It's so interesting. And so what did you think of that world? I mean, compared to comedy?
Well, it was a really kind of easy, delicate transition because it was a mystery show, once again, written by comedy writers.
It was light. It was fun.
Yeah, a procedural written by non-comedy writers would have been a tougher adjustment for me.
But even the procedural, like, explain to me and everyone else, like what? How do you write a procedural?
I think there's many different ways to write a procedural. The way I write a procedural is what really happened comes first.
What really happens comes first. What does that mean?
So you have what you have to think of is, what was our crime? What's the procedure about? What are we investigating?
Okay, so give me an example.
Obviously, this is not a medical procedural. This is a criminal procedural I'm talking about.
Okay, so someone's dead.
Someone is dead. And then you have all sorts of questions you can ask that can form the basis for an episode. You can say, oh, is it an accident? Is it a suicide? Is it a murder?
Right.
If it is a murder, who did it? Why did they do it? Who could have done it? There's any number of is it an open book where the audience knows what happened? Is it a closed book where the audience doesn't know and learns along with our investigators?
And what did you basically do both?
Monk did both opened and closed book, and Monk also did a combination of whodunits, like who was the killer, why done it, like we know who the killer is, but why on earth would they kill someone, and that's how we can prove they did it.
Right.
And how done it. It's an incredibly, like, it's a locked room mystery, for instance, where someone was killed inside a locked room. How did the killer get in there and do it?
Interesting.
You have to figure out how the crime was done.
And so these words are so funny. So you would, as you were breaking the story, you'd break them in the room with all the writers, I assume, right?
Yeah.
And then you throw out ideas, and then someone would say, okay, but let's do this and make it a wide. Let's make it a wide done it this week. Is that what it is?
Well, I think we'd look at the killing and say, what's a really, really ingenious killing we could do?
Okay.
And say, okay, let's look at the motive. And then we'd say, you'd spend probably, say you were breaking a story over the course, if it was just us, we'd probably spend 7 to 8 days breaking a story if we weren't having a guest writer in.
Right.
And the first 3 or 4 days probably were spent just figuring out how the crime was done and why.
Really getting inside. It's very hard to me. This seems very hard to me.
For me, it was a somewhat natural way to do it because it was really fun. And I feel like I was using my comedy muscles, even my plotting muscles, to figure out why you did it. And then you work backwards and this is just us. Other shows do it different ways. There's probably a million different ways to do it.
Okay, but you work backwards. So first you decide if it's going to be a who, what, or why. Is that what it is?
First of all, you can't figure out who killed who and why. Who killed who?
Okay.
Who killed who? How did they do it? Why did they do it? Where did they do it? All those things. Then you figure out, how do we solve it?
Okay.
And for a show like Monk, you'd also say, well, I have someone who has OCD. I have someone who is painfully shy. I have someone who has any number of traumas in his life.
Right.
Also a comic character who happens to be the saddest person on television.
Okay.
And he has a tragedy to his life. And what's the world I can put him in to make him the most uncomfortable?
Right. Right. And that's how you begin. That's where you start from.
That's often where the fun of it comes from. The comedy is from seeing him in the world where he's uncomfortable, because comedy is all about discomfort.
Right.
The emotional story would often come from how he will relate to the world and what it would bring up in his own life. And then the procedural story is how you solve the crime.
Go ahead,
sorry.
No, go ahead.
The way one could look at it is, for us on that show, the procedural story was almost with the armature. It's what you would call the plot, I guess.
Yeah.
And the real story was the emotional story that was threaded through the plot.
Right, of course.
And the two of them dovetail, and one comments on the other.
Right.
It's like a musical comedy, for instance, where songs are the twists. They provide the transition points in the story. You could say the emotional twists or the procedural twists would provide a transition point for each other.
It still sounds very hard to me. Does it get easier?
I think it probably sounds hard because I'm probably overcomplicating it.
Well, not really, because you're solving because Steve and I are thinking of writing a procedural, and so we're watching some, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I know how to do this.
Oh, I'll help you with it.
Oh, good. You're hired.
Yeah. It's not that hard because it's actually easier, I found, than writing an episode of King of the Hill where someone buys a new hat and it changes their life, and you have to make a whole story out of that.
Right. Yeah, but you still have to figure out it's a mystery. You're solving a crime, and you have to make it so it's smart. And I mean, I've watched other ones where they throw in a clue just when you need it. Oh, good, good. I dug a new clue so I can figure out another scene.
Yeah,
But
and there's shows that do that, and there's shows that I found, like, if you look at a show like Mayor of Easttown,
right, I haven't seen
that's
it. But
a
okay,
serialized procedural, and what you realize is it's not about solving the crime. I mean, they solve the crime, but it's really about the emotional drama that's happening. And
right.
the crime is, once again, is almost the backdrop for it.
Right, but to me, that's what makes it so. Like that's why I want to get rid of the crime. That's why. Can we just focus on the relationship between the mother and the daughter? Like
Well,
that I get.
And the one I thought does comment on the other, and they're both about family. And
Right.
I felt like that show worked pretty well. It's very much not a show that I would know how to do.
Well, and that takes me to Law and your latest. But okay, Bones, and let's talk about what you're doing now, Law. It's like that's very different, Law and Order.
Well, I'm not doing Law and Order now. I stopped after last season.
Oh, you did? Okay, but that must be very procedural. I mean, like procedural.
Very different beast. I mean, it was a challenge to figure it out, but I think I'm much more comfortable in the space where there's more character involved.
Yeah, right.
And so
I would think
the part I like best is it's where I've been most comfortable and enjoyed the most is character-driven procedurals.
Right, which is kind of like what USA does, right?
Well, back when they existed.
Back when they were doing it.
Yeah. So they no, in other shows, there's been a lot of character-based procedurals on TV over the years.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Bones was. Bones was a character-based procedural.
And you were the showrunner of that. You were the executive producer.
I was the showrunner for a while, yes.
Yeah. And that was the first time. Was that the first time you ran a show or no?
No, I'd run another show on the CW called As If.
But this is the first. I still would imagine, now that you're the boss of the procedural, I don't know. Like, I need help. It seems so hard to me.
Well, in that case,
hung up on that.
I took over a show that was already working very well.
Right.
Art Hanson, who created it, was 100 yards away on the Fox lot in his office.
Okay.
I could always go running to him for help if I needed it.
Right. And you had the same staff.
Sorry?
And you had the previous same staff?
We had much of the same staff, and I had a co-showrunner, Michael Peterson, who was terrific.
Yeah.
And I had Stephen Nathan, who I took over the show from and only left because he got ill, was still a very close friend, and I could call him up whenever I needed to.
Yeah.
It was, I think starting from scratch is always much harder, or walking into a situation not immediately comfortable is always much harder too.
But now that you've kind of, like, I see this as opening a lot of doors for you. Has it? Because now you have two genres under your belt.
Yes and no. It's always hard. I mean, you have to always be out there and whatever, writing, and there's a limited number of jobs that that a lot of people want to do.
Yes. And
the people who want to do those jobs tend to be, it's one of the, when you think of it, just in terms of being practical, it's a great profession when you're doing it, but it's one of the stupidest professions to try to do.
Why?
Because your competition is really smart, really talented, really inspired, really wants to do it, and works really hard. There's a lot of businesses that aren't like that.
You are listening to What the Hell is Michael Jamin Talking About? Today's episode is brought to you by my new book, A Paper Orchestra, a collection of true stories. John Mayer says it's fantastic. It's multi-timbral. It runs all levels of the pyramid at the same time. His knockout punches are stinging sincerity. And Kirkus Review says, those who appreciate the power of simple stories to tell us about human nature, or who are bewitched by a storyteller who has mastered his craft, will find a delightful collection of vignettes, a lovely anthology that strikes a perfect balance between humor and poignancy. So, my podcast is not advertiser supported. I'm not running ads here. So if you'd like to support me or the podcast, come check out my book. Go get it in an ebook or a paperback, or if you really want to treat yourself, check out the audiobook. Go to michaeljamin.com/book. And now back to our show.
How do you know? Were you in a lot of businesses?
I have a side business.
What is your side business? Is it you rent folding chairs for parties?
Well, no, I actually do multifamily housing.
Wait, oh, well, I knew about this. Right.
And
But
believe me, my competition in multifamily housing will be damned if they want to spend $80 to fix a toilet the right way.
but now do you build or you refurbish? What is that? What does that mean?
I do it with a partner who's also a writer, and we refurbish and build and rent.
And is it in LA or all over the country?
It's in Los Angeles.
This is amazing. I remember, and that's it, but I don't know. That's a whole different skill set. Like, who told you you were qualified to do that?
I think we always revert back to who we are.
Which was you were always a real estate mogul in the beginning.
Oh, I'm not a mogul by any means. We're mom and pop level of multifamily housing, but whatever. My family had small family businesses, probably going back to the Middle Ages.
Yeah,
And they were butchers and bakers and ran a little inn, like did all those things. And that's where like I immediately felt comfortable doing this.
really. And how did you? But was it your idea to get into how? Like, whose idea? How did that idea come up?
That came up during the 2007 strike also.
Yeah, everything comes up during the strike when you're out of work.
So you're out of work, you're walking around with a picket sign.
Yeah,
I was thinking, wait a second, I'm walking around with a picket sign with a lot of angry middle-aged guys.
yeah.
They're all mad at their fathers and taking it out in the studio. And
okay.
we are at the mercy. We're putting ourselves in a position where we're walking around with a sign,
Yeah,
waiting for a giant multinational corporation
yeah.
to pay us a lot of money to do something that we frankly love to do.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not really in control of my fate here.
No, we're not.
And so that's where my partner and I decided to do it. And then, fortunately for us, I know what happened. I've talked about it, and I started talking about it with one of my daughter's babysitters.
How many babysitters does she have?
We had 100 babysitters, 100 best babysitters in all of Los
She
Angeles.
required a lot of babysitters. Okay.
Yeah, no, whatever. When we go out, we'd have like whatever
Right.
5 people we call, whatever, and they'd
Okay.
all come over at once. No, and this woman was actually getting. I talked to her about it because while she was babysitting for us, she was getting her real estate license.
Okay. Wow.
And so she called me up and said, I have a building for you. And it's a really good deal. And Washington Mutual Bank is trying to unload it really fast.
Right.
This is now 2008 or so, and the whole real estate market's falling apart.
And like, how many units is this building approximately?
This building has 5 units.
Okay. So it's small.
We did not know what we were doing, but
Right.
we went and looked at it, and we bought it.
And okay, this is and we had to make a company first. You had to do all the legal stuff.
We formed what's called an LLC.
Yeah.
We talked to a lawyer who was the cousin of someone, and they
Right.
told us what to do.
So, and real estate, as it turned out, was a brilliant idea. It's probably the best idea you've ever had in LA.
It was a very, very lucky time to do it.
Yeah.
And so, like people, I found, once again, like I was saying earlier, my competition in real estate was not as talented or hardworking or smart as my competition in television writing,
Right.
but they were a lot luckier. And just by the strange confluence of events, where interest rates went down and the economy started to pick up,
Yeah.
eventually we all just by good fortune, by luck, we got it worked out well. It worked. Yeah.
This is important because, as you mentioned, it's nothing is guaranteed as a writer. Nothing is guaranteed. And so to have something on the side is, really helpful. Gives you some breathing.
I highly recommend it to people. I always tell whatever. When I talk to actors, I'm always thrilled when I hear that they're writing, even though they tend to be very good writers. And I don't like that.
Yeah.
And or when they're doing something, when they're going to law school, when they're doing anything else, it's just nice to have a backup. It helps you sleep better at night.
It does. It really does. What's that?
You have your podcast.
This is my empire, as you see.
There you go.
Yeah, my media empire. I want to now. You wrote an episode of King of the Hill, because when I talk about King of the Hill, and this is 20 years ago we were doing it. One episode people often bring up to me is the Pygmalion episode, which you wrote. Like, people want to know about that, and we were just joining the show at that time.
I'm glad to hear that. And I still think about that episode. I actually, when I said I hate writing alone, I don't hate all of writing alone.
Uh-huh.
I love the last 2 or 3 days of writing alone.
Right.
So I don't like faced with a blank page.
Yeah.
And once I've kind of taken a sledgehammer and beaten that script into shape, actually turning it from serviceable to good is actually fun.
Right.
That part of it. And I remember the last 3 days or so on that script were really fun.
But how did it? I mean, that was a departure. I mean, everyone there said, "This is the departure. This is the episode which ended in a really dark place."
It was a gothic thriller. Yeah.
How did you sell it to Greg, to the staff? I don't know if he was running the show then. How did you sell it? It was a departure.
Greg was there. So Greg was still there. I don't know if he was officially running the show, but he was there.
Mm-hmm.
Greg had to approve everything. He was basically. And Greg, God bless him, not only did he embrace the gothic nature of it, but he pushed it even more.
Okay.
And some of the really strong gothic elements, like killing.
Yeah, the guy died at the end.
Who are loved. I think that may have been Greg's idea.
Uh-huh. Was there a moment, though, when you go, wait a minute, are you sure that this doesn't seem like the tone of the show? I mean, it's mostly Hank watering, his lawn.
Oh, no. Once we were going to do it, I was off full speed ahead. I wanted to embrace it also. Uh-huh. Now, there were other people there at the time. It was a big staff, and everyone had valid opinions. There were people who did not embrace it the way that they were entitled to that.
Yeah.
But I think we pretty much got the episode we wanted up on the screen.
For sure, man. I mean, that got some big. I remember watching the color in the animation. We watched the color in the room. That's a big laugh. It was like, whoa.
There were very large twists and turns.
Yeah.
It's always really fun to push a genre.
It is.
Closely observed family comedy and turn it into a large-scale gothic thriller.
I had a conversation with Dave Krinsky, he ran the show at one point. You know that, and the funny thing is, with people on social media, they're still watching King of the Hill. I haven't watched it since we were on it, because and that's it. You leave it alone. You're on to the next show. And people really remember it. They remember it. They want to talk about it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't really remember this episode. And Krinsky felt the same way. He's like, and he ran it. It's like, I don't really remember this. Do you remember everything?
Oh,
no. It's interesting that I think people have this expectation of the writers that we should still be living in it. And, we can't, because we have to move on to whatever else we're writing.
Yeah. Now you only have so much room in your head.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is, we're too busy hanging on to every grudge and slight and moment of shame in our lives to use in our comedy.
Yeah. Well, again, I know you don't have too much time, but what do you want to, what do you write? Like, what do you want to write next? Do you want to write procedural comedy? What do you want to do?
I really like the procedural space. I'm working on a procedural right now with a terrific writer who I was on Bones with.
To sell as a pitch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I mean, and given your track record, I would assume it'd probably be easier for you to sell a procedural. I don't know. Isn't there, maybe, no?
I have no idea. I mean, we are in an odd market, so we'll see.
What do you know about the market? Like, what do I hear just from talking to other writers. I don't think anybody really knows. What do you know about the market?
Oh, nothing. I know what I read in the trades. I know what I read in Deadline Hollywood.
Yeah, and by that you mean you know what's getting picked up.
Yeah, I know what everyone else knows. I have
Yeah.
no information. I do know anecdotally, my friends at least have had trouble selling things.
We're having trouble selling. Yeah, right now that's what I'm telling them because they don't know how much money they have.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's an inflection point in the business,
yeah,
and there's been periodic inflection points, whatever, where it's pointed in one direction or another, but no one really knows what they mean while you're in them.
yeah, yeah. It's so interesting. That's what's so smart about real estate. You know, that really. I mean, I'm still hung up on that, and I know this is not a podcast about that, but in a way, it is. It's a podcast about having your fingers in many, whatever it is, pots or something, pies. What is it? I don't know what the expression is.
It's generally pies.
Is it? What about a pot pie? Like a chicken pot pie? It's generally pies, he said. Man, so okay, so that's kind of what you're taking out there is you're working on. And how often do you meet and do you work on it?
Oh, we meet every day,
Really?
more or less every day. I like to work for about 3 or 4 hours.
Yeah. In person, you meet.
No, we work on Zoom,
Uh-huh.
and I don't like Zoom rooms, and I've been in some of those, but
Yeah.
I like working with just one writer on Zoom if you know them well. It's fun. I mean, I found that in a regular room, and I'm sure people have told you this on your podcast and otherwise, that especially when you're anything character based, any show, even if it's not character based, the fun of it really is, and a lot of the creativity comes from what's not going on in the room. It comes from walking to lunch. It comes from grabbing a cup of coffee. It comes from killing time, doing something else on the lot or in your office. And that's when the ideas kind of come out of you.
Yeah.
And you don't get that on Zoom.
No, you don't. I wonder. So it was never back. The rooms never got back. The last show I was on, it was still Zoom. Have you gone back in person?
No,
No. Isn't that weird?
really. I mean, I helped out. I did some punch up on a movie, and that was in person, and on some punch up on an HBO series.
Really?
That didn't go, but that was a mini room. And that was those are both in person, but they were small and they were limited duration. So like a full functioning show in person, I have not done since the pandemic.
I wonder if they're just trying to save money. I don't think they're about saving lives. I think it's about saving money.
I think they're saving money. I think that sometimes one thing they found during Zoom is you could have writers in different cities.
Yeah.
And so if you have writers in different cities to even the playing field, everyone's on Zoom rather than someone being in New York and someone being in Seattle and someone being in Los Angeles. But I certainly enjoy and benefit from the physical presence of other writers.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to do. It's much easier and more fun when you're with other people. For me, I have worked with writers who love being alone doing it. They have an entirely different experience and approach to it.
Well, a lot of it is about just the commute to work. You're probably central.
I'm fairly central, but I know people who actually they don't want to be in a room. I've worked with wonderful writers who would much prefer to be alone and just and knock it out.
Do you like working on set? Do you like being on set?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it depends. Every set has its own character, politics, and it's not particularly fun being on set if you have a difficult lead.
Yes.
Or whatever, if there's something going on there, or if there's tension between the stars, or if there's any number of ways you can have tension on the set. By and large, I've been very lucky. They've been good sets and it's been fun.
Yeah.
And it's the last step and whatever. One thing you realize on the set is when you spend significant time on the set, you realize how many people are really authoring the show that you may have quote written.
That you may have, I'm sorry, what?
If your name is on a script.
Oh.
But everyone on that set, hair and makeup, your agent, your whatever, your director, everyone has your camera operators. They're all helping create that show.
Yeah.
Helping write it in their own way, and they're adding elements to it.
Yeah. And I know I have to ask this because we have so many fans of The Simpsons, but what was that whole experience like for you?
Oh,
because you were there in the early days.
Fairly early days. It was really, it was, first of all, it was a huge break in my career.
Yeah.
That was good for me. I didn't have my first child until very late in my stay there, and that changed everything, where you suddenly, oh wait, sitting here with other comedy writers till 11:30 at night might not be as energizing and fun when you have a baby to get home to.
Yeah.
That you want to see. And so the hours were fairly brutal back then, but I still wouldn't trade it for anything.
I can't imagine, though, that the hours are like that now, right?
No, they're fairly, from what I have friends who are still there, and the hours are very sane now, and they're generally home for dinner.
I mean, that's so interesting is that, like, they've made a career, that show's been on 35 years or something?
Oh, yeah, and they can still turn out some terrific episodes.
But it's a career, like your career. Okay, you might as well be working at Exxon. I mean, that's your career. You get a gold watch, and then you're done.
When I left Simpsons, it was after season 8, and I thought they were trying to get me to go to King of the Hill, and I had the chance to stay at Simpsons, and I thought, well, there's no way it goes past season 10.
Yeah, or any show goes past season 10.
Yeah, it just doesn't happen. And so, I left. I thought I kind of felt badly leaving, but I thought much better to go on a show with some life in it.
Yeah, but then again, it's so like these people, they have job security, which is unheard of in Hollywood.
It is absolutely unheard of, and no, it's actually that's one of the great gigs to have right now.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I know you got to go because we talked about this earlier, but I want to thank you in person as we want to hang up and then briefly thank you, and then I'll let you leave.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
And it was so interesting catching up and just hearing your perspective on all this. And yeah, you're going to be if the show ever goes, you're our first hire to make a procedural. I don't know how to do any of this. But,
thank you.
Yeah.
So are we on air now, or are we recording still?
Not yet. I'll sign off and I'll stop recording. Okay, everyone. Thank you so much. That was John Collier. Great guy.
Everyone, he promised me a job on air. You heard it. Okay.
I did say that. Yeah, but the show's got to go. So it's an empty promise. So, all right, everyone. Thank you so much. A Paper Orchestra drops this week. My new collection of true stories at michaeljamin.com. Go check it out. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Until next week, keep writing.
Wow, I did it again. Another fantastic episode of What the Hell is Michael Jamin Talking About? How do I do it week after week? Well, I don't do it with advertiser-supported money. I tell you how I do it. I do it with my book. If you'd like to support the show, if you'd like to support me, go check out my new book, A Paper Orchestra. It asks the question, what if it's the smallest, almost forgotten moments that are the ones that shape us most? Laura Sangiacomo says, good storytelling also leads us to ourselves, our memories, our beliefs, personal and powerful. I loved the journey. And Max Muchnick, who was on my show, says, as the father of daughters, I found Michael's understanding of parenting and the human condition to be spot on. This book is a fantastic read. Go check it out for yourself. Go to michaeljamin.com/book. Thank you all, and stay tuned. More great stuff coming next week.